Welcome 30 to it, everybody. TJ Wingard here with another episode of Beyond the Tape. And as promised, here are my 2025 quarterback rankings. These are the early position rankings. These will certainly change and update over the course of time. But for the time being, these are how I see the top 10 quarterbacks in this class. Let's waste no time and let's jump right into it. Kicking things off at number 10 with Riley Leonard. Real quick, do want to throw out honorable mentions. QBs 11 and 12, Max Brosmer from Minnesota. Number 12, Curtis Rourke from Indiana, transfer from Ohio. So those two guys just missed the list, like their size, like their arms. We'll talk about them further on down the line. But for right now, let's keep it to 10. We kick things off with Riley Leonard. He's coming off a season in which, obviously, Notre Dame makes it to the college football championship game, losing, of course, to Ohio State, but really good year for Riley. 21 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. You're looking at 2,851 yards and then 7 yards per attempt. Completion percentage at 66.4%. And then you see on the screen some of the things that I like about Riley. I think he's got a good build. He's a good athlete. He was at the Senior Bowl, looked pretty solid there. He was definitely the guy with the least amount of rust on him. So, especially day one, kind of felt like he was the quickest to integrate to that setting. Multi-year starter at multiple locations. You'll hear me say this throughout this entire video a few times because there's a handful of guys that check that box in this year's class. A lot of transfers in this year's group. And I like seeing guys be able to take that step up in competition, go up to a higher level, and how that ultimately pans out for them. I'll have this for a few guys, and mostly they're guys from the Senior Bowl because I got to talk to a few of them, got to talk to people close to them. So leadership traits are certainly there from Riley Leonard. And that's kind of, again, it's tough. The Senior Bowl, I don't get to ask Brosmer and Rourke about, what they do, what they're like at the front of the locker room, things like that. Riley, I got to see it a little bit up close. Got to talk to him for a moment. And, I got to talk to other Notre Dame players who just have nothing but great things to say about him. So he definitely checks the box from a leadership standpoint. And I think he's got a solid arm. I kind of went back and forth. Do I put it in drawbacks? Do I put it in draws? I think right now I'm gonna put it in draws because I think it's a pretty good arm, especially when needs to plant that back foot and deliver a power throw, to steal a term from Chris Sims. I think he's got the capability of doing that. And you'll see he throws certain routes well, specifically like those curl routes. Like as a Notre Dame fan, watched a ton of those, right? And even saw at the Senior Bowl, those were definitely the throws with the most amount of confidence, most amount of zip behind it, and the best ball placement. I'm still putting him in like the 6th round grade. All these grades are going to be where I would personally feel comfortable drafting these guys. They are certainly liable to go earlier than this. But Riley Leonard is my tier 7. I think they're solid arm strength, but the arm really isn't going to wow you at the same time, especially like deep balls. So to kind of put at least a little bit of a caveat, you'll hear me talk about arm strength a couple times throughout this video. Riley is kind of like the perfect guy to talk about in that regard because I think when he needs to, in those power throws, there's enough zip there. I'm not necessarily wowed by the deep ball. I think there's enough carry on it. I think he's got enough distance to play at the NFL level. But I don't think it's anything to the level of even like a Max Brosmer or Curtis Rourke, the two guys left off this list. So, in one regard, I think there's good zip, but I don't think there's great carry, great distance on the deep ball. Not that it's bad, but it's just not ideal. Not great against pressure. I'll be using some PFF grades here, PFF stats here, 44.6 PFF grade. That's the overall grade under pressure. And, watched a lot of them on Saturdays. There would definitely be points where if you got him a little gimmicky, like got him a little fidgety in the pocket, especially early on in the game, things could kind of trend downward from there for Riley Leonard. And I didn't feel like he was a great passer, intermediate, middle of the field, 10 to 19-yard range. I thought the Senior Bowl put him in a spot where there were a couple more throws. The Senior Bowl game even, he gets the start and he has this one throw where he's, getting almost hands to the face. He was getting knocked down, delivers a really nice pass over the middle of the field. So he's showcased, at a couple different spots so far during this, draft cycle that he can do it. It was just, the Denbrock offense is not going to ask you to do that. It's a lot of ghost posts and hitches. Same thing with LSU when Jaden Daniels and Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. Big narrative around that for those guys last year, and he goes from being the OC at LSU to the OC at Notre Dame. So some of those concerns still carry over for me with Riley Leonard. But again, he'll throw, with confidence that hitch. He'll throw with confidence that curl route, and he's willing to give guys a shot downfield. But he's also a guy that the main reason he's ahead of the other two is just with his athleticism. I think there is a longevity maybe to his career, right? Like versus the other two where athleticism is a question mark. Do they end up becoming pocket passers? Brosner, I think, has some great throws with anticipation, can attack the middle of the field, but that also gets him into trouble from time to time. Some head scratching decisions can be in there. He's throwing with too much confidence, too much, anticipation, and anticipating the wrong thing. Riley, I don't necessarily know if he ever had to, necessarily put the Notre Dame passing attack on his back. Even kind of looking at, the stats from this season, not a whole lot of games, and actually only one game, and it was the final game of the year against Ohio State. That was the only game where he passed for over 250 yards, and then the rest of the season, there's a handful of games where he's over, 200. He's got 2 other games where he's over 225. So he was never asked to do that, but I think his athleticism gives you a solid potential backup. I don't think it'll be great right away, like some of the other guys we'll talk about later, where I think plug and play, they could be your backup quarterback. With Riley, I'm not quite there, but I do think he could develop into being a solid backup quarterback. He could also be your tush-push guy, like if you have a guy you don't want to risk injury with, or I've been saying this for a few years now, if you have a statue of a quarterback, I think it's worthwhile adding an athletic threat in there just to keep opposing defenses on their toes. Yes, it's kind of like the Steelers Justin Field thing, and when he comes on the field, it kind of tips you off that this is probably a run play. But if they're a dynamic enough athlete and you get that, read option, look, you're still leaving that defensive end with a tough decision. Wait on the quarterback who's athletic, or go make a play on the running back and potentially expose my defense to what the quarterback can do with his leg. So it's still, you're putting a defense into a spot where they have to make a decision. So I think from that standpoint, he's got at least some upside there as like a useful backup. All right, let's go on to number 9. Dillon Gabriel. And I like Dillon Gabriel. I don't want this spot to be anything that's like seen as super negative. I like the person. Again, you see leadership qualities. One of the things I put on there at Senior Bowl felt like he was one of the guys that everyone wanted to go and talk to and everyone wanted to kind of pick their brain with. And how could you not? I mean, a lot of great football under his belt at a handful of different spots, UCF, Oklahoma, then ultimately Oregon. And he's coming off a year with, over 3,800 yards passing, 30 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, which kind of even off that. Let's start with the drawbacks here for Dillon Gabriel. Obviously, everyone wants to start with 5'10". That's certainly not ideal. There have been teams to make it work. I think, Russell Wilson, he lived in a day and age where there's a lot of single high coverage. So his play style and that deep ball accuracy kind of fit with what defenses were doing at the time. The rise of too high shells, you even saw it this year. You play too high against Russell Wilson, you really take away his biggest strength. And then some of these other guys, Drew Brees, and he was kind of right at 6 foot, but like lights out accuracy, unbelievable above the shoulders. And then, Kyler Murray, unreal athlete, so like there's, and then, Bryce Young's kind of the latest of these, smaller quarterbacks, and his rookie year would not inspire confidence in going out and get a guy who's around this height. But his year 2 is definitely a step in the right direction. And hopefully, if you're the Dillon Gabriel hive here, you're kind of looking at that and saying, hey, Bryce just needed a better situation. You just need a little bit more time. And that's ultimately something that Dillon Gabriel, you draft him hoping that he doesn't need time, right? Because he has played 5 years of college football with an abundance of starting time under his belt. I mean, you're talking about a guy with almost 19,000 college yards passing. Like, that's ridiculous. But I didn't mention the 30 pass touchdowns, just 15 big time throws. And kind of off of that, the point right above or somewhere in there, he's coming from a really good situation. Like a couple of tackles, one that's a first rounder, one that's going to get drafted, relatively high. He's going to get drafted somewhere, Adonai Cornelius. Jordan James is a good running back. A couple of good receivers. Tez Johnson's going to get drafted somewhere, probably in the top 100, if not just right there outside of it. Evan Stewart with a chance to rebound his stock next year, but there was a lot of hype for him coming into this year. And then you get Terrence Ferguson, who should be a tight end who's off the board no later than the end of the 4th round. So he's coming from a pretty good spot. And even before that, like Oklahoma had some talent. The couple of stops he's made his way to throughout his college career were good business decisions because they were better programs than what UCF was, and there was more talent, more money, all those sorts of things. So he's coming from an ideal situation, 15 big-time throws, 30 passing touchdowns. To me, that kind of spells out that, there were some open throws. There was a lot of yards after the catch. It's a good schematic offense too, right? Like, he's got some help there, which that's going to be the case point for a lot of these guys. It's hard to separate, is he elevating the situation or is the situation elevating him? And we'll kind of talk about that. And again, not trying to knock Dillon Gabriel here, but I do think he gets a lot of help from that situation. Just like another guy that we'll talk about a little bit later on. I think that guy has more prototypical size, a little bit more prototypical traits. The arm isn't ideal for Dillon Gabriel either. Like, I think it's fine. I don't think it's terrible, but both with zip and velocity, I don't think it's going to wow you. And I think you kind of saw that on D3, the red zone drills, where it got tight at the Senior Bowl, areas are very, crammed and margins are tighter than ever. there wasn't anything really there to wow me. You also can't run, right? Because you're not trying to get hit and, they blow the whistle dead before there's any tackling anyway. So like his mobility wasn't fully put on display there. And then maybe that's that one little wrinkle that engineers the open window for the throw. That's definitely a component of his game. But to me, I think he was a functional Saturday athlete. And that makes me wonder what he'll look like athletically on Sunday. And you'll hear me say that a few times in today's video too. Now, again, the draws. This guy has unbelievable accuracy and an awesome, just natural ability to play and throw with anticipation and throw on time. And some people, I think about, of course, like everyone's talking about this, Mike McDaniel and that, Miami Dolphin offense, right? Like if Tua got hurt, like this is as ideal a guy to step into that situation. One, he throws from the same side, so that helps a ton too. But two, like this is a guy who can handle the motions of that offense, get the ball out quick. He's got a snappy release, really like that in his, repertoire, in his arsenal as well. And he'll, get the ball out quick and he'll play on time. I felt like Miami, handing the torch over to Snoop Huntley, they just couldn't do a lot of the same stuff they want to do. I think Jalen Gabriel's a guy that can kind of step in and keep the ship afloat from that standpoint. And there's a lot of other teams that, rely on a ton of motion. That's becoming more and more prevalent. And the timing of all that is paramount. Plus, again, accuracy is huge. Now, again, over 17 games, I don't know what that would look like. To me, Dylan Gabriel's like you need him for 4 weeks and you can kind of make do with some of his limitations over that 4 weeks period with the right game script, with the right game plan. I just don't know about him as a 17-game starter. So I think you're getting a solid backup here, and that's going to be kind of the case here for, tier 6 guys who can develop into being a solid backup. But I do think they also need the right situation. You can't just draft Dylan Gabriel into the Steelers offense and expect him to be, a really solid backup if they're going to throw him out there middle of the year because of an injury or whatever. I think it takes the right scheme to make him a solid backup. But I do like Dylan Gabriel. Again, love the character, love who he is as a person. And you're also looking at a guy with, awesome accuracy, great natural timing, which that's an intangible. You don't really develop that. That's just something you have or you don't. And then, the drawbacks, smaller size, smaller arm, coming from a really good situation. So for me, it's a little tough to kind of parse out some of those things with Dylan Gabriel going to the next level. All right, let's get on to quarterback number 8, Quinn Ewers. And another, so we're getting a little tier up here. Quinn Ewers and then the next guy, I think there's upside there. And that's kind of where, like, I had to put him in, I had to have him in the top 8. In a QB class that's not over the moon. It's not the year ago's class, right? It's not Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, all those guys, Michael Penix, Bo Nix, JJ McCarthy, right? This is not that class. It's not quite the 2022 class, but if you go back and check out the content on my YouTube channel, my top 2 QBs that year were Malik Willis and Sam Howell because, shoot, if I'm going to have to draft a guy, let's just shoot for some upside here. And that was my thinking then. And to a certain respect, lower down in the rankings here, but I can't quit Quinn Ewers and the guy at number 7. I think there is undeniable upside there. And Quinn Ewers has done it in big games, right? Like I think about the first time he played Alabama, like that first quarter was like, oh, future first round pick in the making here. Like this was his coming out party. And then he did it the next time he played Bama, right? And like the Michigan game this year, and that's an awesome defensive line. Michigan might not have been everything that we hoped they would be coming into the season, but they still had Will Johnson that game. And that front four was still awesome, so that's where it gets a little tough. He's got high moments that make you say, whoa, yeah, first round guy. And then he's just got lows that make you think, I just can't make this work. Like it's just not going to happen. And then, of course, he leads his team to the college football playoff. And that game against Arizona State is almost emblematic. There's some head scratching stuff in there. And then ultimately you get into overtime and makes some big plays, or at the end of regulation into overtime. And it's like, okay, there you go. There's the big moments of Quinn Ewers. So he's a bit of a roller coaster, does have good size, 6'2", 210. So we like that. I think he's got really nice arm talent. And he's got it in both regards. Plant the back foot, let it rip, zip it through to a tight window. And he's also got hey, I'm going to chuck it deep. And he's got really nice touch, really nice arc in the deep ball. And he can throw it with the best of them in college football. The arm checks out in both regards there. I do think he tends to throw with his arm more. So sometimes on those deep balls, they're underthrown, which ultimately kind of works out in the favor of the offense with modern NFL and even college football, right? Like you underthrow the receiver, they work back to the ball, you're going to get the flag every time. But he underthrows a lot of those deep balls, or not a lot of them, but he'll underthrow those deep balls from time to time because I think he's just throwing too much with his arm and not enough with his legs. And that's tough for me to say how much you can change that with working with the QB coach and working with, a guy in the offseason. That's tough for me to say because to me, that's where you're pulling your resources from. That's more than just mechanics. That's how your brain is thinking about what you should be doing through the rep. And I'm a former baseball player, former pitcher. So I can't really think of a best analogy there, but when you're getting into where you're drawing your power from, and it's almost like, I guess the best analogy is sometimes baseball throwers, and I'm actually going to talk about this with Jalen Milroe, but sometimes you'll lead with your arm, and you'll get that front arm or your throwing arm coming across before you're really pushing off with your leg. And that'll lead to situations where if it's, right on right, you're throwing and missing a lot low and away, or you're missing up and into that righty. You're missing in those two different points, completely contrasted as opposites, but ultimately because you're leading with your arm, that's where it's going to go. And that's a tough spot to get out of as a pitcher, because that's, again, changing and trying to refocus and rebalance where you're pulling your energy and your resources from as you're doing this. And that feels like a lot harder to do than say like, hey, you need to, you're overstriding with your front leg, or something like that. That feels like a lot easier of a tweak. And that just takes some time, some reps, and more comfortability in that spot. But I don't know. But Quinn Ewers, that's kind of like my main thing. I think he underthrows a lot of those deep balls not because he doesn't have the arm, but because he's just throwing with his arm. He's leading with his arm and not his feet. And I think if you change that, holy cow, like things start to look even better already. And he's also a guy, and I've talked about this in past videos and mocks and whatnot, but he just, I don't know what it is, but like this guy's just got to find a consistency in throwing from a solid base. There are so many throws where it's like, man, you had the extra quarter second, half second to set your feet and throw. But a lot of times he's just throwing from an uneven base, man, and it is rocky. And in that Arizona State game, sometimes it works out, right? You get that touchdown to Gunnar Helm, and you look at where his feet are at, and it's like, not how it's drawn up, but he's on the move and making a play, just like the best of them. And that's where it's frustrating again with Quinn Ewers. The highs and lows are up and down. But I also think, throwing more with your arm than your feet, inconsistent base. You can get away with that if you're talented from time to time, and you'll have these moments. But if you can also fix that, you're talking about a guy who's got a lot to work with here. So again, it's tough to measure where Quinn Ewers is because I don't know how willing teams are to work through all that. I don't know how easy it is to make those adjustments and actually see, the fruits of that labor. So that's kind of where I struggle with Quinn Ewers. A lot of intangibles that you like, good frame, solid legs too. Like he's a good athlete. And of course the arm's awesome. And he's a guy who's willing to throw over the middle of the field, has good touch to layer, balls over the middle of the field over linebackers. So he's got a lot that you like there, but he's battled injuries. The footwork's inconsistent. His play has been inconsistent because of it. And also you got to talk about it. Like, it's a Texas team with two, first round talents at offensive tackle. Cameron Williams is probably going to go later than that, but he also had an injury and he's also a first year starter, right? But had he gone back to school, I'm pretty confident he's a first rounder in 2026. And then a year ago, he's got two receivers go in the top 50, a first rounder and Xavier Worthy, and another guy who I think should have been a first rounder and Adonai Mitchell, but he falls to the second round of the Colts. And that was with JT Sanders and Jonathan Brooks. And this year it's with two really awesome running backs, and Weisner and Ballou. And it's with Gunnar Helm, another tight end that's going to get drafted somewhere in the first 3 rounds. And he's got Xavier Worthy, who I'm not ready to quit, has a bunch of talent. Yes, he was injured. Matthew Golden, all of a sudden, a first-round receiver. And Steve Sarkisian, one of the best play callers at the college level. So, it's about as ideal as you could get. And again, how much do you measure the man making the situation versus the situation making the man? I don't know. And that's going to be personal preference, and that's going to be very subjective person to person. But I think the situation is an elevator for Quinn Ewers, and ultimately, I don't think he lived up to what could have been there. And he's just too up and down as a player. So he comes in at number 7. He comes in at number 8. Jalen Milroe comes in at number 7. Very similar conversation, just in a little bit of a different way, but ultimately kind of the same point. Same tier, same round grade. Because if I'm a team and I'm picking at the beginning of the 4th round, that's where my risk appetite matches up with where these guys are at. I think they'll probably go before then. I don't know if they both make it to the 4th round. If so, maybe it's just one of them. But that's personally where, if I was a team on the board, that's where my risk appetite matches, the work that's going to come with these guys. So Jalen Milroe, I've said this multiple times. He's got the toolbox that I want to work with in this class. Like all things even, taking away the production, taking away the above the shoulders, all that stuff. We're just talking about arm strength, athleticism, what this person has to work with. Jalen Milroe's got the best tools, and comfortably for me. Howitzer of an arm, freaky with the ball in his hands, has great deep ball accuracy and touch. We even saw that at the Senior Bowl, right? Like there weren't a whole lot of wow throws for Jalen Milroe, but the ones that were deep balls, So that's always been a strength for him, and leadership qualities too. Another guy that at the Senior Bowl, you hear him talk and you're kind of ready to run through a brick wall yourself. In specific, I remember him talking about somebody had asked him going into the season, were there thoughts about, hey, Saban retired, did you think about going to the transfer portal? And he said when he declared to go to Alabama, he signed his letter of intent with the Crimson Tide, and he wasn't ready to change that commitment. I think that says a lot about the character. And that's why, I think he's going to get to the combine and he's going to throw against air and the arm's going to look awesome. But I also think he's a guy that in that room is going to sell himself pretty well to the team. So again, might not be available in the 4th round. That's just personally where I'm at with him and where I'd feel comfortable taking on this risk. The accuracy in the 0 to 20 yard range is up and down to say the least. Kind of off of that, these 2 points are, I think, why. 8.5-inch hands. If you watch the Tennessee game, there are multiple RPOs where, he's tucking it from the running back. He's going to throw it out wide to the receiver. More often than not, it's Ryan Williams, the all-star freshman who's 17 and, should have been in, poli-sci or, government class in high school. But instead he's like roasting the Georgia secondary and SEC secondaries as a whole. But in that Tennessee game, you see multiple throws in those RPO situations that just sail out of bounds. And you're like, dude, it's just you're just flicking out to the sideline. I think 8.5-inch hands is exactly why, in my opinion. And I just don't think, even in the intermediate part of the field, I don't think he gets a consistent grip on the ball. And that's kind of why it'll flutter. It's not always a pretty tight spiral. Sometimes it is. I think the Vanderbilt game, he's got a couple of really nice intermediate passes. They lost that game, but that was a game where I was like, okay, there might be something here in Jalen Milroe. But ultimately, it is up and down. It's inconsistent. The other reason I think he's, especially over the intermediate, that 10 to 19 yard range, to me, I think he overstrides with that front foot. Noting a couple times in a couple different games, 927 Q1 against Tennessee. You see it thrown over the middle of the field, and it's a ball that just drops off and it just hits the ground before you can make it to the receiver. And then the Mizzou game at 956 Q1 sails. And it's just like that pitcher analogy. So I'm trying to lean back so I can show you. So you're bringing that arm forward, and if you're not engaging your legs yet, that ball is going to sail up and into a righty, or it's going to go down and away to a righty. And it sounds weird that it'll go in those two distinct, very different directions, but it's just basically your brain will overcompensate. You start missing up and in, you start overcompensating even more, and your arm comes flying down. And next thing you know, by the time you're pushing off, you're like pushing the ball down and away. And I think that's ultimately the case here with Jalen Milroe. Not quite a baseball comp. And I just think he overextends with that front leg, and that leads to him having too wide of feet. The feet are wider than the shoulders. And because of that, the base is just a little shaky, a little wobbly. And sometimes the shoulders tilted up and he's going to sail it. And sometimes he overstrides and the shoulder starts to tilt down like this, and he'll plant it in the ground like 4 yards before he gets to the receiver on a 15-yard dagger or something like that. So those are the couple things that I see mechanically from Jalen Milroe. The good news is I think you could fix at least the overstride. I think that's fixable. 8.5-inch hands, I can't fix unless you're like Kenny Pickett and like double jointed and can all of a sudden do these crazy stretches and, get to the combine and it's like, oh, it's 8 3/4. It's not as small as it sounded like, I also wonder if he does play with gloves, specifically if he gets drafted to a team that plays like in the AFC North, right? Like if he's a Brown in the making, or if he's, a backup for the Ravens, or the Steelers take a flyer on him as a Justin Fields replacement or something like that. These, environments that snow comes into question. It's cold. And when it's rainy and cold, that's a headache. Versus if he goes and plays in a dome somewhere, I don't think he'll need the gloves. But the certain environment, the certain landing spot, I do wonder if he eventually does break out the gloves. And Teddy Bridgewater, not the biggest hands, played with gloves. Kenny Pickett, not the biggest hands, plays with gloves. So I do wonder if that's ultimately something that comes into play. And a couple of these guys I have neutral. 3 different play colors the last 3 years. Like that's a caveat we would give NFL quarterbacks a break for, let alone college quarterbacks, where I think it's even harder for them to overcome some of those challenges and pick up an offense even quicker, So in that respect, I got to give him his flowers. That's not an easy task to handle there. So I did want to shout that out. It's a neutral. I'm not saying it's positive or negative. And that's, not every one of these guys has a neutral, but I did want to throw that in there where there was something that came to my mind and made me think, I don't know if that's good or bad. So I did want to make that note. In one hand, it's like, hey, you got to work with Tommy Rees and Bill O'Brien, 2 guys who are now, or Bill O'Brien then left to go work at the NFL again. And Tommy Rees is working with the Browns now. And then you're Kalen DeBoer fresh after he got a guy drafted in the top 12. So it's like, in a lot of ways, I look at that experience and those playbooks and those guys he's worked with, and it's like, that's a good thing. But it's also like easier said than done for me. I didn't have to learn the playbook and learn the calls and, figure out what checks are what and what we're going to do in this formation in this situation in the 2-minute drill, all that sort of stuff. So I did want to give him some flowers there because I think that's tough. QB number 6 for me is going to be Will Howard. This is kind of where, I think we're leaving the backup quarterback that has some upside. Dylan Gabriel, backup quarterback with some time. I think he could be a solid, your number 2 quarterback on the roster. And even kind of the same for Riley Leonard. I think it's just going to take a little longer for Riley to get there versus Dylan. Then we get to Will Howard, where I think you could draft him and you're pretty confident about him being your backup quarterback. Like if he has to come in, it's not the end of the world. Even as a rookie, yes, he's a rookie, but like if you're looking for a cheap backup quarterback option, I think Will Howard is a great one to consider in that 3rd round. I did put mid to late third just because I did want to differentiate him from QB 5 and 4 a little bit. I think he has really natural touch, pushing it deep over the middle of the field. Like he's got a nice arc on it, plays with good touch, while also being able to kind of rifle it in there when he needs to. I don't think the arm's incredible, but I don't think it's bad either. He's another guy, and really one of the main things that stood out real quick, good build, got the size you want there for sure. And also, like, even in that national championship game against Notre Dame, you saw Ohio State's willingness to use him as a runner. So I do like his athleticism. He's a better athlete than you would think. And if you follow college football, K-State, that's an offense that wants to use the option, wants to use running ability from quarterbacks. And Will Howard was at K-State before he was at Ohio State. And that's certainly in his profile as well. So again, 6'4", 235, good build. Plus he's a good solid athlete who you can use in the running game. Okay. Now, honestly, I think the thing that I most noticed and the thing that kind of most stood out as I was watching him, this is a weird trait that nobody talks about, but like it's rare. It just is. This guy will not make a throw before you make him. Like when he stands in the pocket, if he's got a clean pocket, he's in no rush to make a decision. And I'm not a one-to-one comp, not at all. But I specifically remember kind of Brady at the peak of his powers. He had that trait. And I specifically remember, I believe it was a Jets game where it's first and goal. They're like the 4-yard line, and the rush is just not getting home. And Brady is just patting it. And he is just not going to be forced into a bad decision. And then eventually something comes open and there's a touchdown. I think that might have even been in the 2007 season. So like literally we're talking about like the peak of his powers. And Will Howard's got a lot of that same stuff. Now, granted, it helps when you played Ohio State. And even with some injuries, that offensive line kind of figured it out, and I think about the Tennessee game, like that was really like, okay, this offensive line's come together. They're missing their two best offensive linemen in my eyes, or at least two of the three best. I'll say two of the three best because I still really like Donovan Jackson. But he's playing out of position. Anyways, that offensive line really came together with some fixes that they needed going into that game, especially after what you saw happen in the Michigan game. That Tennessee game, like there's a couple throws, deep out right sideline to a Emeka and he's just standing there. He's in no rush. No pressure's not home. I'll sit here and chill. And now that leads to like, how much can you do that on Sundays? That's great that you could do that on Saturdays and do that against Tennessee in the first round of the college football playoff. Yes, that is cool, but it's going to be a different beast on Sundays. But when afforded the option and, he does get a clean pocket on Sundays, they're not going to be rare. I mean, they are going to be rare, but I'm kind of losing what I'm trying to say here. They're not going to be off the table. Like you're never not going to have that situation. When it does, like I don't think he's going to be forced into a bad decision. He's just going to take what the defense gives him in a lot of ways, just from the pressure standpoint. Anyways, that was something that stood out, and I just felt like, a guy who's not going to like force a throw just because he's like, I've had it for 3 seconds, I have to get rid of it. I got a clean pocket, stand here, deliver a good throw. And I think, again, that out route to Emeka against Tennessee is a good example, something like that. And also the last positive I got to give him here, his best games come on the biggest stage of his career, right? Like I think the two best games you could argue of his college career are the Tennessee game in the first round and the national championship against Notre Dame. Like those are probably games 2 and 1 all time for Will Howard at the college level. And they come with 2 of the 4 biggest games he's ever played. So got to give him some props there. Now getting the drawbacks, accuracy in decision-making is like, I feel like some people are talking about him like he's super decisive and, won't make a mistake. And I don't know, maybe I'm just hearing the wrong rhetoric around him, but no, I mean, the accuracy is spotty. He is not like the most polished, quarterback, and he's got some head scratching decisions, maybe not so much in the college football playoff, but even then, 2 turnover worthy plays against Texas, looking at some PFF data, the Michigan game, 3 turnover worthy plays that, that wasn't a college football game, playoff game, but it's the biggest rivalry in college football. So, a lot put on your shoulders there. A couple turnover worthy plays against Iowa as well, so I don't think it's perfect. The Penn State game had a rough turnover in that one too. I don't know. It's just not perfect there from a decision-making standpoint. And there's plenty of throws he misses from an accuracy standpoint as well. And then really the main thing here is he's coming from the ideal of all ideal situations. Yes, Dylan Gabriel had a good group there at Oregon. Yes, Quinn Ewers had a lot to work with at Texas. But we're talking about an Ohio State team with, yes, Josh Simmons got hurt at the first round offensive tackle. Seth McLaughlin's a top 100 pick at center. Yes, he got hurt as well. But Chip Kelly just took a job to go work at the NFL level with the Raiders. Donovan Jackson's going to go somewhere in the top 50 in my eyes. Jeremiah Smith's the next coming of Julio Jones. Emeka is a first rounder, and he's awesome. And he also came with, a really solid defense that figured it out, a great pass rush. Also got to play with 2 awesome running backs, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. So it's kind of tough. And I'm like literally looking at the PFF grades on my screen right here in front of me. And, you start to see the offensive grades tick up, tick up, tick up. They're on the up. And then you get to the Michigan game and then the college football playoff kind of picking up where it left off. I would argue Ohio State is a team, right? Like week 7, Josh Simmons goes down, a little bit of influx about what they're going to do with the offensive line. The bye week, week 8, week 9, Nebraska, week 10, Penn State. And then you get into an easier Big Ten schedule, Purdue, Northwestern, before a big game against Indiana. But then, you have some time to kind of figure out that offensive line. You get in the Michigan game. And collectively, I think Ohio State, like as a team, they took a step back. But I also think the team took a collective step forward. So not only did Will Howard play better in the college football playoff, those might have been the 4 best games the team played, right? Like, remember, they were up 35-0 before halftime against Oregon, like towards the end of the second quarter. That's crazy. So, yes, his play got better at the right times, but also I would just say Ohio State as a team started playing better. So his situation around him got better. And there's just a lot of plays that you're like, dude, what a sick play. Like, even if it's a good play from Will Howard, all you can say is like, dude, Jeremiah Smith's unbelievable. That's an Emeka Egbuka highlight. Oh my God, Trayvon Henderson, how did he get away? Quinshad Judkins just put that guy in the dirt. Like I find myself in a lot of these plays, other than the ones where I'm like, dude, like he's got a great pocket and he's not leaving it. I love that. But even that, it's like a credit to the offensive line in a lot of ways, in the largest way. So that's kind of where I struggle. Like there are plays where it's like, yes, he deserves a slice of the pie for credit here, but it's also like, dude, he's playing with some aliens who deserve maybe a bigger slice of the pie for the credit. So I don't know. I struggle with Will Howard. I do think, again, you're drafting a guy who could be a solid backup. Good amount of playing time under his belt, 5-year college career, and he's coming off winning a national championship. Would have loved to see him at the Senior Bowl. I don't know if that's a great showcase for quarterbacks always, but like it would have just been interesting to see him in that environment. And I do believe like leadership qualities are probably there. I just didn't get to see it from him. I didn't get to talk to him because he wasn't there. So, and then neutral 1 year doing it at OSU, So you go from K-State to Ohio State. And again, the situation kind of around him, his best games kind of coincide with like the best games Ohio State as a whole played, which is a little bit of a duh statement, but it's something you got to take into the analysis here. It's not like he's the catalyst for why those games are. Sometimes he is, sometimes he's not. Sometimes he finishes with 201 yards against Indiana and 85.7 overall passing grade, or overall PFF grade. 201 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. That's nothing to write home about, but it's a pretty solid game, and he didn't do anything to, let Indiana back in it. That's all he needed to do. So that's where it's really, really tough. And I'd done it a second year Ohio State, maybe that would have changed my mind, right? Like with a different roster, one that's maybe a little less loaded, maybe that could have changed my mind as well. All right, let's get on to quarterback 5, Kyle McCord, the guy who Will Howard replaced at Ohio State. So I know this is going to rub a lot of Buckeye fans the wrong way, but man, Kyle McCord, there might be something here. And like simply put, he plays like Baker Mayfield, but with like attributes that match Brock Purdy. Really nice ball placement. I really like the accuracy that he has. Plays with good timing and anticipation, especially on those like out routes, because like getting the neutrals here or the drawbacks, the arm is not great. It's like an average arm. So when he throws that, he's in the middle of the field and you're throwing that out route right sideline, he's throwing the ball honestly before the break even happens. But it's because it's going to take a second for the ball to get there. So like you say on the body, on the break, it's more like on the body just before the break for Kyle McCord. So great timing and anticipation. Again, that's a natural thing. You either have it or you don't. But the reason he has to do that is because the arm is kind of meh. So do want to kind of put that in there. And the country big time throws, which leads us perfectly into the main drawback. Second in the country in turnover-worthy plays. He was definitely a gunslinger this year. And it's interesting. You hear gunslinger and you think, yeah, like an arm like Baker Mayfield, Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love even, not quite. Not quite there with Kyle McCord. But I do love the willingness and the confidence to put a game or a team on his back and say, you know what, we're going to make this comeback and I'm going to do what I need to air it out and make it so. Or you know what, I'm a confident guy. And like, that's the main thing is like visibly more confident at Syracuse than he was at Ohio State. So he's just willing to take more shots and it paid off sometimes. It also got him in trouble sometimes. He's got a little bit of that like Matt Stafford and Baker Mayfield's got a little of this of them too. Sometimes they're awesome and the big time throws are natural. But sometimes the turnover-worthy plays leads to the big-time throws, right? Like you set the house on fire, so you have to be the hero that puts it out. There's a little bit of that in some games with Kyle McCord. So did want to note that, but, leader in big-time throws, that's, not something you can make up. That's something you can just take away from this guy. And that to me speaks volumes, especially considering he was a guy at Ohio State that felt like, he's one bad mistake away from benching himself, sometimes it felt like. So good on him to be able to bounce back, step into a new environment, and really thrive. Another one of these guys where athleticism played for me on Saturdays. I'm kind of worried about what it'll look like on Sundays. might be just athletic enough to, break the pocket, get that 5-yard scamper for a first down on 3rd and 4. But I don't know, like how many first downs is this guy running for? I don't know. I wouldn't really go out of my way to assume it's going to be a whole lot. And then leaving OSU, found comfort at a smaller program. Did want to put that in the neutrals because I don't mind. And if anything, I could admire that not everybody can thrive in the Big Apple, right? Like think about like a Geno Smith. Seattle's still a big city, but like leaves New York, he bounced around the league for a little bit, but then like finds a solid situation in Seattle, which is still a big market, but smaller market compared to New York. And that's the place for him where he's found comfort and he's thrived, relatively speaking. He hasn't won a Super Bowl or anything like that, but he's still a rock solid quarterback, or even kind of the same thing with Sam Darnold, right? Like leaves, bounces around. Some of it's also like you get with Kevin O'Connell and good things happen, but like Minnesota, getting, out of New York, that media market, Minneapolis, big market, but it's not New York. So I do wonder if that's part of it. And some coaches, some evaluators are going to look at that and say, you know what? I think about Brian Daboll on Hard Knocks, offseason last year. He wants a receiver who wants the ball, right? He might look at this and be like, I want a guy who wants to be at the big program and thrive, not the guy who left, got to a smaller school, and that's where he found comfort. So not a negative or a positive for me, but I do feel like there are going to be some people who view that as like, he left the big program to go do something easier, compete at a smaller level, and that's where he found comfort. I want the guy who will do it at a high level. And some teams are going to be like, I don't care. I seriously don't care. I'm just glad he figured it out because I like him, and I like watching him at Syracuse. And that's kind of where I'm at with Kyle McCord. But yeah, I think mid to late 3rd, I'm intrigued with him being a solid backup option for you right away. Then we get to my quarterback 4, Jackson Dart. I personally would take him in the 3rd round. And he's, the first of the 3 I would probably take in the 3rd round. He is my tier 3. And I've been over this a ton. And ultimately, there's not anything I want to say about Jackson Dart that you haven't heard before. He's got a really nice arm. He's got nice arm talent, both from tight window throws, power throws, and when it comes to natural distance and, how far he can just launch that thing. He also throws a good touch down the field. Really nice accuracy. Like ball placement is rock solid on tape. And there's moments at the Senior Bowl, right, where it's specifically one-on-one drills, right? Like I tweeted out a clip of Brittany Stool versus Bowman in the best of one-on-ones, and it's a perfect ball from Jackson Dart. There's another one-on-one, running backs and linebackers, where he put it up in the corner of the end zone beautifully. But it's in those one-on-one situations where the space is not as much of a premium than it is 11 on 11. So we'll come back to that in a second. He can make quick decisions, a lot of RPOs in this offense, and they may not be pro-style offensive reads, but fact of the matter is he's looking at a DN, making a key on, should I hand this off? Should I keep it? He's also evaluating the space and what the defense is doing from a coverage standpoint. Is it better for me to just flick it out wide to Trey Harris or Jordan Watkins or whoever? So he is having to make quick, timely decisions. So I don't want to take that away from him. There's not always decisions that translate one-to-one to the NFL level. There's going to be some RPOs, but there's also going to be a lot more like, they're showing me cover 2, but it's really just going to roll into cover 3, and I need to know that and how to beat it. So it's a little different, but I do want to give him credit there for making some of those quick decisions. Quick, snappy release. Like the ball will fly out of his hand, and the ball will come out of his hand very, very fast. And he's got a lot of starting experience, 3 years at Ole Miss and some time at USC before that, and he's got great production to go with it, which, for some people, that's, it's kind of like the Moneyball quote. If he's such a good prospect, why didn't he play good? Like why aren't the numbers there to back it up? That's not going to be something you hear about Jackson Dart. And he's a good athlete. For 6'2", 225, he moves really well. And that's a good underrated thing. And to me, that's one of the biggest differences between him and Matt Corral. Like I think Jackson Dart's a much more functional athlete. Matt Corral, who wasn't a bad athlete, but I think Dart, maybe it's just like how he moves around in the pocket and when he takes off and run. Maybe it's just the timing and the decision-making of it. But to me, I noticed his running ability more than I did with Matt Corral. Drop backs. And it's, a lot of the same stuff you've heard. That Ole Miss offense, Lane Kiffin's good at his job. Simply put, he's really good at what he does. And he manufactures a lot of open throws, whether it's, 4 verts just in a really pretty way and college secondaries, like you can tell the DBs who play on Saturdays and which ones have a chance to play on Sundays. I hate to say that, but you can tell. And that's one of the positions where you notice it most clearly. So when they go 4 verts against Furman, like in, Georgia Southern and Middle Tennessee, no disrespect, I'm not a Division I player, but like you go 4 verts against those 3 programs. Yeah. Like Trey Harris is going to finish with like 500 yards receiving between those 3 games. Jackson Dart's going to light it up, that's to be expected. But then you get against Kentucky, who has, athletic corners who can click and close and can run with your guys down the field. And all of a sudden now it's like, ooh, can't do that. Can't do that the same. But it's also the motion and it's the RPOs and it's, the deep crossers, right? Like there's a lot that Lane Kiffin does to manufacture open throws for Jackson Dart. So in the Senior Bowl, it's really hoping to see, hey, we're going to get him into a pro-style offense. We're going to get into team drills and 11-on-11 in the red zone, and those windows are going to get tight, and he's still going to make some big throws, and he's going to really wow me. He'll be my quarterback 3, maybe making a push for QB2. It just didn't happen. His best throw all come from one-on-one situations. That's just the fact of the matter. You go to the team drills, there's a couple of nice throws. There's a nice seam, especially on day 3. I remember seeing clips of that going around. I remember watching it in person, seam ball right up the middle. He zips it in there, fires it in there. Beautiful. But it's cover 3, and I think the linebacker misunderstood what he was doing, and it's a wide open throw. It's one of the more open throws we saw during team drills. So again, I come back to, okay, well, can he do it as a tight window throw? So that's kind of where I'm struggling. And I think he's got the accuracy to be a tight window thrower. It's more about the mental and the processing and knowing when to make that throw. When's the best, most optimal time for me to fit this in here? And what's the way I can layer it above the linebacker, but below the safety? And I just don't think there's a whole lot of that on his Ole Miss tape where he's forced and tested into those situations. Not much experience under center. I think 30 snaps under center this year. Not much. And we saw it on day 1 where there were 2 fumbles, within like 5 to 10 minutes of each other because he's just not used to doing it. So, and he still misses some throws too. And that's where I can struggle with Jackson Dart because you don't get to have your cake and eat it too. You don't get to have this offense where in a lot of ways it's kind of playing on easy mode because like Lane Kiffin's great at his job. You're playing with great talent. They spent a bunch of money in the transfer portal, and now you're kind of reaping the benefits of that. And then also miss some easy throws in reads. Like there's some times where he's just, and this is fine. Like there are many times where this is okay, but there's times where he's willing to take the dump off and he doesn't see the wide open seam ball that he could rip up the middle right behind that dump off route. Like, so it's just like little things like that where it's like, you're already looking that way. Why didn't you see the bigger play right behind where you threw the ball? So you don't get to have your cake and eat it too. You don't get to play an easy mode offense and then like miss some big play opportunities and not have me hold that against you. So I did want to bring that up. Ultimately, though, I think you draft Jackson Dart and he's just got to sit for a year because of the under center stuff. Like he needs a year of getting comfortable with that, but he also needs a year of like getting into an NFL offense, seeing the speed of the game, and reading a defense pre-snap and how it's going to change mid-snap, or in play, and what to do then. Like I just think it's going to take a little bit of time. If there's a team that's willing to draft Jackson Dart and not play him for a year, let's just say it's the New York Jets. That's what I had in my last mock. If they're willing to go Tyrod Taylor for the entire year, and then eventually turn it over to Jackson Dart, I will then be willing to buy into this. But if a team drafts him and tries to play him right away, I don't think it's going to be great. Like, I really don't. I hope I'm wrong because I do like Jackson Dart, and I think he was another guy that just the person at Mobile, he didn't take a whole lot of interviews, but the ones that I did see, seems like a really nice guy. Seems like a great character. And the Ole Miss guys that were there had nothing but great things to say about Jackson Dart. So I am rooting for the player, no doubt about it. I'm just not fully there, and it's just a tough. We haven't seen one of these Ole Miss guys, these Lane Kiffin guys, go on to the next level. So I really hope he kind of sets the mold and kind of kills this conversation about guys going to the NFL draft playing for Lane Kiffin. They can make that translation. It just hasn't happened yet. But I hope Dart's the first. My quarterback 3, Tyler Shough. And I'll be honest, Tyler Shough was closer to quarterback 2 than my quarterback 2 was to being QB1. So just for that. But Tyler Shough, man, after the first round, this is the guy I want to put my name on. I said late second. Really, I should have said like 50 to 64. Because like once you get outside the top 50, I think the drawbacks, don't worry about it because it's just worthwhile at that point. So real quick, let's start with the drawbacks. Late breakout, right? 5 or even more than that, 6 years of college experience, bounced around from a few different teams and programs. And then ultimately this last year at Louisville, he has the year that's going to, get him drafted and, gets in the invite to the Senior Bowl. And, for quarterback, I feel like the age breakout matters a little less because there is more physical to it for sure, but it's not like a 25-year-old offensive lineman moving 18-year-old defensive lineman. To me, I think that like the strength and maturity, body maturity difference there is more stark versus like quarterback. I think a lot of that development comes up here, but there are physical assets that come with the course of time too. So I don't want to ignore that. But so later breakout, bounce around college football. Again, you're talking about 6 years of playing in at the college level. That's a lot. 2 years at Oregon, 3 years at Texas Tech, and the last year at Louisville, and the injury history that comes with. This guy has pretty much injured everything you possibly can at that position, which that's tough. Now, granted, I'm not a doctor, and I don't have access to his medicals, so I don't know what that's going to be. But even comparing it to Jackson Dart, I'd be willing to see, and my risk appetite would be more willing to take on a guy that is just coming off a healthy season. Yes, he's got injury history, but he's just coming off a fully healthy season versus the guy that I need to spend a year working with him relentlessly under center in the playbook, making reads, pre-snap diagnose. Like there's just a lot more work to me that comes with someone like Jackson Dart than Tyler Shough. And some of it's this picture, some of it's like the number 9. He's got a little bit of the Matt Stafford kind of mixed in with Carson Palmer in there. And, guys have had injuries, so it's not the best comps to use there. And I'll also say the last drawback, if you get pressure on him early in the game, he'll see ghosts for a little bit. I think he eventually got over it both times I noticed it. But like if you get first quarter pressure against him, the feet start to get a little happier. And, it's like, ooh, that's not his best tape. And then the neutral, 25 years old. I'm not really worried about that. Quarterbacks are playing until 35, 38, 40 years old. So I'm not worried about that. In a lot of ways, like you're looking at a year where Bo Nix played forever in college. Jaden Daniels played forever in college, and like they looked all the better for it. So in a lot of ways, I think his age and maturity and just the willingness to grow and get better over the course of playing college football, like what a novel idea, right? It's almost like that's what it's there for. But his willingness to do that and buy into it has set him up to be a better version of and a better player to where he is now. All right, let's get on to the draws. What makes me think Tyler Shough, you get to spot 50 in the second round. You're the Pittsburgh Steelers drafted a couple spots after that. Why should that team drafted Tyler Shough? Love the arm talent. I mean, power throws and launching it deep. Like, there are some awesome throws. And if you haven't watched the Miami game, it's a laser show. It is a laser show put on by Tyler Shough. The other game that I did want to point out, I didn't like the Virginia game quite as much, but he did have one other game that I thought was rock solid. Let me pull up my notes real quick. Tyler Shough. The SMU game. SMU and the Miami game. Like, if you're looking for a couple games where he lets it loose and kind of looks like Matt Stafford, those are two that I highly recommend. And I think he looked fine against Virginia. It's just a little less there. And I think they did a good job kind of bringing some heat on him. And I think Jonas Sanker also played a really good game there. My Virginia fans out there. But love the arm talent. Great arm throwing it deep. Plenty of zip behind it to make those power throws. He'll throw from multiple arm angles. He can fit within the flow of a traditional offense. Will get the ball out quick. They don't run a whole lot of screens or anything like that, but when they do, ball's out quick. He's got a pretty good release from that standpoint. Time to throw below 3 seconds to kind of back that up. And that's with some plays where he is holding on to it and extending it. He is better as a mover than you would expect for someone who is as big as he is, 6'5", 225. This is a big guy, but he moves really well for that size. And again, the willingness to let it fly. Like, again, that Miami game, like, whew, let's go. And especially as, like, you draft him to probably be a backup, maybe to compete on the line in a, like, under center, play action heavy. Like, I'm thinking Clint Kubiak in Seattle. I'm thinking Arthur Smith in Pittsburgh. If, like, I don't think they would do this, but like a Miami would be interesting. Bobby Slowick's there now, but if he was still in Houston and they didn't have CJ Stroud, that would be one of these Shanahan offenses is really intriguing. Could he be, I say he kind of looks like a Matt Stafford. Could he be the Rams, replacement plan for Matt Stafford as these trade rumors swirl? Those are the kind of spots that I'm looking at, and I'm like, this guy could thrive in those situations. So under center, play action, letting it rip deep. And also, like, for an Arthur Smith, he hasn't found that guy in Pittsburgh yet that wants to throw over the middle of the field. Tyler Shough is very confident in throwing over the middle of the field. Wider hashes in college, yes, but he's got plenty of confidence letting it loose between the hashes. So that's my Tyler Shough. I like him. And I mean, he's a guy that over the last month or so, I feel like a lot of big-time draft analysts are kind of banging the table for. Again, outside the top 2, outside the first round to that point, this is the guy I'm taking a shot on. If he ends up having injury history, so be it. But once you get in the second round, I'm not as worried about it. I think there's a lot more to his game than someone like a Drew Lock. Like, I think he's just a lot better of a prospect in that standpoint. Or honestly, like, I liked Will Levis a lot coming out of Kentucky, but like viewing where he is now at the NFL level versus Tyler Shough, like, one went in the second round, one probably should go in the second round. Like, I'd almost just want to roll the dice to see what Tyler Shough's all about. And I say that as someone who loved Will Levis, but I'm coming to terms with what he is at the NFL level. So yeah, big fan of Tyler Shough. Again, outside the first round, that's the guy I want to take my chance on. My quarterback too. And again, to me, Shough, you watched the tape last year, he's closer to QB2 than I think Sanders is to QB1. But a lot of that is also like Cam Ward. So don't want to besmirch Shedeur Sanders here. I got a second round grade on him. Ball placement's fantastic. He's got great vision too. More often than not, he's not going to miss you if you're open. And he also plays with good timing too. Like, I think about the pick 6 against Nebraska against Tommy Hill, and that play lives in my head rent free because like that's so uncharacteristic of Shedeur Sanders because he's almost never like going to stare down something. And in that moment, you almost see him like, this is too late to throw it, but I'm going to do it anyways. And like, he's too smart of a player to make that mistake. So but to that point, he is a very smart player and he will play on time and he won't force the issue. He's got a great turnover worthy play rate because of that. And then that's why that play stands out because it's so uncharacteristic and so unlike Shedeur Sanders. So again, good decision making, very good and accurate passer and accuracy on top of that. Him and Kyle McCord, I think the ball placement, I put ball placement more than accuracy because it's not just is he hitting the open guy, it's hitting the open guy and giving him room to run afterwards. I think these two guys are probably the two best in the class at giving their guys a chance to do that. And then, I mean, maybe this will count more for others, but I think from like a leadership standpoint and like a character standpoint, / like, the Brian Daboll, like I want a dog, carried a, P4 offense and furthermore carried that, Colorado team. This is not a team that had a great run game. This is a team with like an okay defense, like mostly stopped the run well. Everything else was kind of meh. The reason Colorado won games was because of Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter. More often than not, it was just that simple. And I think there is something too, like being the dog of a program, being that top dog, and like having that mentality, having that mindset specifically at this position. Like quarterback and cornerback, where you're going to get beat. Like not every play can be perfect, but I'm a dog and the next rep's going to be mine. Like I love that mindset. And / like nobody wants to face me. Like I love that kind of killer mindset, specifically at those two positions. And Shedeur Sanders to me has that. Drawbacks, the arm is okay. The arm is far from special, but I think it plays at the next level. It's just going to take, like everyone wants to say, Joe Burrow is kind of like and Joe Burrow really is the upside. He doesn't have an elite arm, but he does everything else at a 99th percentile level, And I don't know if Shedeur Sanders is totally that, but, that's kind of what you're shooting for here. And you hope for, Shedeur Sanders. He's an okay athlete. Do not think that he has Deion Sanders athleticism. He is not going to blow up the combine in really any regard, in my estimation. He's a fine athlete. And he's one of these guys where it plays on Saturdays. I'm worried about what it looks like on Sundays. And then a couple of things here. He's pretty quick to leave a clean pocket. And again, some of that is like, I think kind of habitual because of what's happened at Colorado. That first year, the offensive line's terrible. This year, he's just basically wearing a cape and going Superman mode. And it's like, okay, I'm just going to break the pocket now because that's what I've done to have big plays and had success. But sometimes he'll do it and leave a clean pocket. And it's like, you're too quick to do that. So that's going to be something that I think it's a habit thing. So I think at the NFL level, that's just going to take some time, some comfort, some trust to be formed before he gets that kind of knocked off. On a similar note, there's 7 fumbles too. So we want to see the ball security cleaned up there for sure. And then a 20.1 pressure to sack rate. So that's how often, a quarterback pressure gets turned into a quarterback sack. And that number is the highest of the class. So that's not great. And that's also part of why, the turnover worthy play rate's at 1.3%. There's times where he's just taking the sack as opposed to, risking or enforcing the issue. So I did want to make note of that. But those are some of the major, bugaboos I have with Shedeur Sanders. I think he's going to be a rock solid player. And that's kind of where I struggle with all 3 of my top guys. Cam Ward, I think, has the highest ceiling. In a lot of ways, I think Shough might have a slightly higher ceiling than Shedeur. But like Shedeur, in a lot of ways, I think he could be very Geno Smith-like. QB 16 to QB 10 on his best years. Is that enough to win you a Super Bowl? Maybe. Especially while he's on a rookie contract, if he can hit the ground running right away. Yeah, maybe. Or with like a God squad around him. Yeah, probably. But it's going to take one of those like right situations, perfect situations, versus like you have an elite quarterback and you're in the race every year because of that. And you're just trying to figure out how to maximize that. So I don't think he has that elite upside, but I do think he comes with a high floor. And I see a lot of Geno Smith, and I'm a big Geno Smith guy. So, I don't think he makes it to the Seattle Seahawks, but like that would be a really fun place for him to go and just kind of be the guy they pass the torch to. Or could he be a Raider because of that, right? Like Pete Carroll's the reason Geno Smith got his second chance and got to have his renaissance. That's kind of why I think it's another, reason to buy into the fuel and fire that Shedeur of the Raiders would make a lot of sense. Shedeur Sanders, my quarterback 2. Leaving us with Cam Ward as my quarterback 1. Not going to surprise anybody. You know what? I've actually kind of changed my tune a little bit here. I'm going to give him a late first grade. And some of that is like you get the round bump because you're a quarterback, or half round bump. But honestly, I think even with my evaluation, I'd go late 1. Like I'd be comfortable even in last year's class. If you're a QB needy team or you want to trade back in the first round because you didn't get one of those guys, like if you're the Raiders, you're the team left without, a quarterback with musical chairs, you're kind of ended, I would trade up to 30 and draft Cam Ward. I'd be fine doing that. So ultimately, I do think, late first is a fine grade. And then, of course, position value, he gets the half round bump. And he's going to go higher than that because of, scarcity and position value and, where the league's at. But he is my tier 1 quarterback, late first round grade. The arm talent's awesome. And he's willing to let it fly, push the ball down the field. He'll throw from multiple arm angles. I love that. My early comp was kind of like he's Stafford arm angles with like college Geno. Like people kind of forget about what Geno was like at West Virginia, but he was a solid athlete with a rocket ship of an arm. And I kind of saw that in Cam Ward. Ultimately, Jordan Reed was the first guy I saw with this, and Max Chadwick at PFF has kind of doubled down on it as well. And I'm fully with those two guys. I've been saying Jordan Love is the comp for the last few months now. And yeah, like the arm angles, the arm talent, like he's very Jordan Love-ian. And again, the willingness to go push the ball down the field. 5 years of starting experience. And I know 2 years of that at Incarnate Word, 2 years of that at Washington State. Not high profile schools, but 5 years of starting experience. Again, Jane Daniels, ton of college football experience. Bo Nix, ton of college football experience. I think it does add to these guys' profile. And I will say, and I struggle with this because this sometimes I can get carried away with how much I like this about guys. I love seeing guys take steps up in competition. And while the competition gets stiffer, tougher, whatever word you want to use, they get better. And Jared Verse was kind of the guy I was like pounding the table for. He was great at Albany. He goes to Florida State. That's a huge leap up in competition. He didn't look phased. He looked like he matched it perfectly. And Cam Ward goes from playing option quarterback at high school to air raid at Incarnate Word. Pretty good, FCS school. And then leaves that, goes to Washington State. Not a premier program, but lights it up there. Has some great years. A lot of turnover-worthy plays, but has some awesome statistical seasons. And then, ultimately gets a day 3 grade last year, decides to go back to school and says, hey, I'm going to take another step up in competition. I'm going to go play at the Power 4 level. And he does that at Miami. His most pro-style-like offense. And he has the best year to date. The year with the lowest turnover-worthy play rate. The year with, as many big-time throws as any other season. And he looks the most NFL ready because, you see the arm talent. And again, the turnover-worthy plays go down. But also because he has an Xavier Restrepo, you see him being more willing to take the check down. Take the easy stuff and let that Khalil Shakir clone. He weighs a little bit more than Shakir. But, I see so much Khalil Shakir with Xavier Restrepo. Let him do the work for you. Let Elijah Arroyo do the work for you. Damian Martinez. Let these guys be your weapons. So we saw a lot of growth and maturity. And I love that as this guy has gone up in levels of competition. And again, you have to take in mind, he was playing option quarterback 6 years ago. 6 years ago. Where were you 6 years ago? Think about how much has changed for this guy over that 6 year duration. So again, lowest turnover-worthy play rate of his career, highest big-time throw rate of his entire career, 6.3 big-time throw rate, 3.3 turnover-worthy play rate, and he's doing it at the highest level of competition he's played at. What more could you ask for? The drawbacks, he still plays with fire, like that Cal game, kind of has that Stafford, I'm going to light the house on fire, but then also I'm going to be the hero that, puts it out. That game kind of case in point, but the comeback they make against Cal in that game is ridiculous. And it's because of number one here. He put them on their back and said, hey, I put us here and I'm going to get us out. He's not an elite athlete, but I do think he's a functional athlete, but another one of these guys where it's it's good enough on Saturdays. What does it look like on Sundays? To me, though, he'll run for first downs, but to me, his athleticism is mostly he drifts and gets away from pressure, and he's just extending the play, keeping his eyes downfield. So I'm a little less worried about it with him than I am with other guys. And then, the last drawback here, you could have maybe put it in neutral. 1 year, great play at the P4 level, So, yeah, he did it in Incarnate Word, but he got day 3 grade. And now all of a sudden, one good year at Miami, and now he's the number 1 overall pick. Yeah, that's where I'm at. But and some of that's just position value. Not last year's draft, he's not going number 1 overall, that's for sure. But this year, it's certainly a live possibility. And if not 1, he's not going any later than 3. That's kind of what it feels like right now. So would you like to have 2 years of his Miami tape? Absolutely. But you got the one with 4 other years of tape with a lot of wow in that tape, Incarnate Word and Washington State. It just comes with a lot more head scratchers and a lot more honestly, not even head scratchers, head pounding into the table type of plays. But he cut down on that at Miami. I think a big part of that is Xavier Restrepo, but also it's just maturity and growth, and he's made strides in the right direction. My neutral here before we get out, he does play very loose. And there are times where I'm I love his confidence. I could watch this all day. It's elegant, and I love watching him drift and kind of float and kind of maneuver through the pocket and then let it rip, and there's the big play. But there's also times where you're whew, man, that's scary, dude. Whether it's fumbles or it's just, man, you're really, really comfortable back there. And what if you don't see that pass rush coming? Or what if you're too comfortable and you're drifting too far back? What if you're missing the open throw because you're comfortable and trying to look the ball? So some of that's going to come down. It's subjective, really. It's going to come down to the person and how do you take it? Do you see it as confidence? Do you see it as something that he needs to get more secure? He needs to kind of play within the regards, the restraint maybe that I want him to as an NFL play caller or whatever. And is he capable of doing that? So some people who will want him to play a little less loose will think, that's who he is. I can't fix that. And some people who want to play more loser are like, yeah, I can get them to reel it in. We can fix this. So it's going to vary by team. So again, that's why it is in the neutral. But guys, that is going to do it for my top 10 quarterbacks of the 2025 draft cycle. This is the early version of this. So we will do this once again before we get to the official and, final weeks of the NFL draft. So we will do this once more and we'll see how much changes from now and then. And I'll probably have 15 quarterbacks in that one versus just 10 in this one. But I would love to hear your thoughts down below in the comment section. Who's too high? Who's too low? Who's your favorite quarterback? Who's your sleeper of this class? Leave me that down below in the comment section. Reply back to this if you're watching on X, or if you want to DM me on X with those answers, I would be happy to engage with you in my DMs. But especially if you're watching YouTube, let me hear those thoughts down below in the comment section. But I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. That's going to do it for me. For 32 Beat Writers, my name is TJ Winger, and we are signing off.